Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of SBJ Live. I'm Dan Kaufman with Sports Business Journal. Thank you for being here. As you all are coming in here, I am going to go through the logistics that I go through for every episode of SBJ Live. And if you're a repeat customer, then I apologize for repeating this again. If you're a new customer, though, I want you to make sure you pay attention because this is the best way to enjoy your experience here with SBJ Live. There are two things that I find to be most important to make sure that everyone gets a good experience out of this. One is there's a chat bubble on the right-hand side. And actually, let me back up. Both of these things are related to engagement. We want you engaged in this conversation. The more you're engaged, the more you're going to get out of it, and the better the presentation is going to be from our perspective. So, chat bubble on the right-hand side. Make sure you jump into that chat and tell us who you are, where you're coming from, and what you do. And if you see people who you know in that chat, go ahead and say hello to them as well. We really encourage that. And then right next to the chat bubble is a questions bubble. That's where Ethan and I want you to put your questions, and don't wait until the end. There's no specific Q&A portion at the end. Make sure you're putting those questions in that chat, that question bubble as they come into your head. You can also upvote questions that you see come in, and we will do our best to get to those questions. Okay? So introduce yourself in the chat and put your questions in the questions bubble, and we will do our best to get to the questions. This is Physical Retail and Out-of-Home Ads in 2024, the Sports Connection. It's presented by Placer AI, and we have with us Ethan Chernovsky. He's the Senior Vice President of Marketing at Placer AI. Ethan, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate the time. I'm going to flip it to you, and I'm going to be asking questions of you throughout, and I want our audience to send me some questions as well. So, Ethan, the stage is yours.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dan. Thanks, everyone, for joining. So we'll give 2 seconds of background just so people have a sense of what is the perspective that informs our perspective on things. And so Placer's a location data company. What that means is people vote with their feet. We show you how they vote across the United States every single day. Very critically, this is all data that has been stripped of personal identifiers like MAIDs. It is all aggregate data, so we are GDPR, CCPA compliant. What we do is we then observe that panel of devices with apply machine learning and AI algorithms on top to make estimations of visits to retail locations across the country, stadiums, and kind of everything in between. And we present that in a wealth of different reports within our platform on everything from the visitor journey, the true trade area, visits, visit frequency, and a whole lot more. And with that, I think we can dive into the insights, the fun stuff.
Go for it. So, Ethan, and by the way, again, to the audience, as you're coming in here, please introduce yourself in the chat and give us your questions in the questions tab. Ethan, as I look at this, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me is, really tell us what's specific to the sports industry here. What does the performance within retail mean for the sports industry, for this audience?
So I think we need to kind of, you always want to start high level and then we want to kind of dive in. But there's things we want to understand about the consumer, right? And we want to understand that no matter kind of what the type of experience I'm trying to get across or whatever my ultimate mission is, understanding kind of what that retail sentiment is and retail engagement is going to give me a lot of indications about what's going to work, what's not going to work, and what tactics I might want to try depending on my specific goals. And I think one of the things that we've seen quite a bit of when we look at the data is that overall, retail has been tremendously resilient. And so consumer sentiment around spending, around making these visits has been really strong considering we're in a stage where things have been more challenged. So for example, we know there's a wider economic situation that has limited spending for a lot of people. We also know that there have been significant elements like the pull forward of demand that have changed the way consumers interact. So when we look at kind of the sporting goods category overall, if we had looked at the same data in 22 or 21, we would have seen significant jumps, right? This is the leading space. Oh my God, what a time to be in that segment or to be adjacent to those retailers or selling through those retailers. That's obviously changed. And a big part of the reason that that's changed is just because there was so much consumption early on that those normal patterns have yet to return. And what we are seeing when we look at the numbers is this recovery of that segment as things begin to normalize from a, hey, how much have I purchased and when is that natural cycle of replenishment actually going to come up? But there are other kind of takeaways when we look at the wider retail landscape in terms of what is moving the consumer what people are interested in, and what this indicates about their wider mindset. So for example, one of the big things we see is this shift to value, right? So discount and dollar stores, the Five Belows, the Dollar General, seeing a lot more success. So if I have this retail mindset from a sports perspective, we have the head of retail at whatever group is we're thinking of, understanding where those shifts are taking place is critical. But even more, it's understanding where those shifts aren't taking place. So for example, when we see a value orientation for customers, that doesn't mean that everything they do is a cost-cutting measure. So for example, one of the least efficient ways we can spend our money, when we think about the way we could do it cheaply and the way we could do it out of home, let's call it, is coffee, right? That $6 cup of coffee at Starbucks is a cents on the dollar cup of coffee at home with your Folgers, or maybe 50 cents if you have a fancy Nespresso machine. People are spending on that cup of coffee. People are spending on health and beauty. They're spending on wellness. And understanding the value of these affordable luxuries is especially critical in the sports space, because we know how impactful these brands are to the consumer. So there is an emotional relationship. There is a connection there. And when we think about the wellness plan, we'll talk about some of this a little bit later on, it's tremendously important. One of the segments that's outperformed almost any other since the onset of the pandemic is fitness, right? So brick and mortar fitness, the Planet Fitnesses of the world, the Lifetimes of the world have done incredibly well. And what this tells us is that there's this element about fitness, wellness, sport that brings us together, pushes us out of the home. And while so many expected it to center around at-home usage, so think about your Pelotons and your mirrors, it's actually been the opposite. And that gives us a very interesting indication of where the customer places value on the experience compared to just maximizing value for the sake of value.
And so let's talk a little bit then about like the niche sport-specific, sport-focused retailer. Well, how is their role evolving?
So interestingly, I think there's a lot of things that are working in their favor, right? So we think about, we were looking at like a Lids flagship, and you see the kind of traffic pattern shift, and you obviously see that peak as things lead up to the Super Bowl, right? And makes sense. It's Vegas. Vegas is hosting the Super Bowl. It's right at the head of the Super Bowl. You're going to be attracted to that specific location. But overall, we see that this kind of owned sport-specific, memorabilia-specific perspective can have a tremendous amount of value and a tremendous amount of pull. And understanding kind of where and why is really critical, because one of the interesting things we're seeing in the sports space and more broadly in retail is this conception of owned retail, right? So much more niche, much more focused. But imagine, and we'll kind of share our colors already, but like I am a huge Dolphins fan. That is my team of choice, right? If there's a Miami Dolphins store, and there is one, right? And it's in, I think it used to, last time I was there was in Davie, it was near their practice facility. But that store has a really interesting power to it, right? And it's one of the things that we're seeing in retail. Like let's go to another space entirely. Let's think about the M&M store. Right, the M&M store is a great example of a brand that normally we wouldn't associate with owned retail, setting up a physical space that people walk through and you can buy product. The thing that is happening there that is so interesting is that there is a very strong argument to be made that if in those stores they never sell a single bag of M&Ms, a single canister of those mini M&Ms, it's still a huge value. So the question is why? And this is such an important element when we think about the way sport retail is evolving. And retail, by the way, in general. And the idea here is the store is transitioning in terms of the way we think about it from just a place to sell product, and therefore the measure is sales per square foot or just overall transactions, to turning into a platform. And when we think about the store as a platform, it widens the way we understand value. So for example, I walk into said M&M store, I walk into the NBA store in New York, or I walk into, any owned retail space, and I'm engaging with the brand. And I'm being kind of enveloped in everything that they have to offer. What is going on? What is the brand about? What does the team mean? What is it trying to communicate back to me? And what does that mean for my long-term experience? Now, there's elements here. So one could be, I want to get you to fall in love with the team even more so that you find products you like, and fine, maybe you don't buy it here, but you know that this thing exists. So when it's time to do Christmas shopping a few months later, you're going to go online and buy said product. Or you're going to walk through and I'm going to get you to fall in love deeper with the brand, and you're bringing your child in and they're going to kind of see the thing that they want more than anything. There's also the element here of the media lift perspective, right? We think of what we're doing to expand the reach of a brand, and we'll talk about this a little bit more also in the next slide. There is an element to, we know that audiences connect more when something is experiential, but experiential in a way where it makes sense, not experiential in the way where there needs to be a climbing wall and all of that, but something that's going to get me to understand and embrace the brand. Now imagine if I have several minutes with you in the store. What does that mean compared to what I'd be chasing online in terms of the visit? The amount of time, the way I can engage with you, the types of experiences I can generate, and therefore the ability to interact with you over time. And the final piece there is creating a physical touch point. And I think it was the CEO of Allbirds said, someone visits a store. When they go online, their basket size is 150% larger than if they go straight online, which means that these physical experiences really matter. And so much of what we want to accomplish, again, whatever space we're in, but certainly in the sports space, is how do we take advantage of physical touch points, obviously for the value they provide in the physical space, but potentially even more valuable is what they mean over time from an omni-channel perspective.
You mentioned it a little bit, and I'll just go directly to the question. Let's talk about pop-ups and flexible retail.
Yeah,
they're obviously playing a major role in other segments. What role can they play? Should they be playing in sports, or what role are everybody seeing that they're playing in sports?
Yeah, so I know this is going to come as a shock. I'm not a huge Hello Kitty person in my day-to-day life, but I do. When we were kind of talking through, and we've had this conversation with franchises, players within the sports space, we think there's a lot of interesting lessons to be taken from this experience. And the Hello Kitty was these cafe trucks that would go across the country, and whatever mall or shopping center they went to, there would be this massive spike in visits, right? And it's not just them. If you think about a brand like Shein, which is a women's apparel online retailer, they'll do pop-ups, and you see massive surges in visits and engagement. By the way, you also see e-commerce uplift in those same areas. So imagine you do something physical and then it has this kind of long tail of e-commerce. You also see people doing these kind of extended stays. So think like IKEA has these extended pop-ups in malls. And the reason that's so interesting is because it gives brands a degree of control. So if I'm, again, let's take another sport. Let's go kind of current with basketball. I'm the Philadelphia 76ers, and there is we have a playoff stretch against, the Celtics, right? Why am I not trying to figure out some way to engage my fan base when I'm there? Why am I not trying to ask, are there certain periods where my team is going to be somewhere else where I might want to be part of it in a short-term function? Right now, this doesn't always work. Or where is there a major event that's going on for my sport that I want to be involved in? So it's the NBA draft, right? And there's a city that's hosting. How do I take advantage of these seasonal jumps in a way that also allows me to get a feel for what that market could be like for me? And it doesn't have to be as cross-country as that. It could be a suburban approach, right? We want to see how these other markets do, because it's this ability, again, to create experiences for audiences that are going to generate a long-term connection. And if we know anything about sport, and it's something we'll touch on in a little bit, is just how powerful the experience is. It's not like other brands. You might love the company that you buy sweatshirts from and have a really strong connection with said brand. You might love your favorite cereal, but there's a different emotional connection with sport brands. And to a very large extent, it's not fully taken advantage of in the retail space.
Interesting. This is an interesting slide. Migration, not a surprise, significant migration as a result of the pandemic, and it's kind of continued movements throughout the U.S. in particular. What impact should the sports industry be aware of, or what impact generally did that have on the broader business landscape, or what will it have?
So I think it's understanding audiences and audience movement, because like the number one question we should always be asking ourselves is, where is my audience, right? And if my audience used to be, and again, we have different audiences for different elements, but if my audience used to be in the middle of New York City, and I took out a big billboard in the middle of New York City, and I ran events in the middle of New York City, and I had my pop-up location in the middle of New York City, if that audience is no longer there, it no longer makes sense for me to push that strategy. And so there's this question of, do I understand who my audience is? And do I understand where they are now? And the where they are now adds other interesting elements to it. So let's think about that older millennial, and let's take the New York example. I am an older millennial. I'm living on the Upper West Side of New York in a 3-bedroom apartment or 2-bedroom apartment with 2 children, and it is time to escape. And the pandemic is what kind of was the final, the straw that broke the camel's back. I move out. I'm not just moving to a bigger space that I want to fill. I'm moving to a place, in most cases, where my cost of living is lower than it was before, meaning I have more space and more disposable income. And also, in many cases, I have an element of first-time demand. So again, many of us carry our team loves no matter where we move, right? But in many cases, we're going to support the local team, and that could be the local college team. It could be the local franchise. And there's this element of, oh no, there's new audiences. How do I attract those new audiences? There's this first-time demand component to bring people into my world, and understanding the opportunity that exists there and how likely they are to be different types of kind of fit within different types of psychographic or demographic segments where I can appeal to them and then bring that message in a way that will be effective for me and my business.
This one, again, an interesting slide. Flash in the pan, I think, is maybe a phrase I might think about when I think about pickleball, but I could be totally wrong about that. But, how flash in the pan is a craze like that, and what does it tell you about sports or experiential retail that we should learn going forward?
I mean, I am not a pickleball player, but I have friends who are absolute diehards, and they can't get enough of it. And the interesting thing, we operate very heavily in the retail real estate spaces. And the amount of excitement there is, not just around pickleball, but of other experience-oriented fitness, somewhere like semi-fitness versions of this, is very, very interesting. There are formats within basketball that are grabbing, some attention. There are these kind of David Buster kind of esque kind of gaming experience locations that people are talking about. Even we think back to esports, when that was kind of all the craze. Obviously, remember when people thought that was going to be bigger than the Super Bowl? That was a fun one. Mm-hmm. But there is something very exciting here, and I think the idea is, what we learned coming out of the pandemic was people crave experience. People crave being together. And there is something in sport to lean into that. And that could be partnerships, and that could be advertising, and it could be figuring out ways to get people engaged in a wider sense. But there is a massive opportunity in sport, both from a top-down perspective. So let's think like, hey, the biggest leagues are obviously having the biggest impact on things like football and basketball. But when we look at the grassroots pickup of pickleball, it's very difficult to not get excited about the potential for other similar concepts to maybe not see the same level of success, but still see a lot of success.
In other words, I'm going to get emails about my flash in the pan comment. No, I'm kidding. Again, theaters, another interesting data point to look at. Definitely somewhat of a surprise, the popularity in 2023, or, and then I'm looking at your data here is interesting as well after 2023. What does the performance last year tell you about the future of sports and sports content?
So we do love to toot our own horn. And I think one of our great calls, we do a prediction post at the beginning of every year. And one of our great calls last year was, we said movie theaters and bookstores are going to have a great year. And both segments did very, very well. We also said this year that movie theaters are going to have a rough year. We said this in December. And the reason was the bar has been set unfairly high. I think Barbie and Oppenheimer and all these things were unique mixes. Mm-hmm. And the bar was set very high, and there was kind of the writer's strikes. You're just going to have a content challenge, right? But the answer to the content challenge is not we need more movies. The answer to the content challenge is we need more types of content. And one of the interesting things, we had the COO of AMC speak at our conference in December, and we asked about this question specifically, like, why don't we see sports in movie theaters? Again, I was a Dolphins fan living in New Jersey. Wouldn't it be amazing to sit with another 60, 70 Dolphins fans and consume the game, eat the food, be part of a crowd? Like, you don't want to watch the game alone by yourself. You want to watch it with people who have the same rooting interest or are part of an experience. And there's licensing issues. But when we think about the potential for expansion of creating experiences that allow people to consume games in a way that drives significant revenue for lots of players and creates a great experience for the visitor, there is a business opportunity there. And I think, I'll give you another example of this. There was a drive-in component that Walmart ran during the pandemic. So, hey, come to this location, go inside, buy some snacks, and we're going to put up a drive-in screen and watch a movie there. We were asking at the same time, it was, the Heat were playing in the playoffs, and we said to a landlord who was operating in South Florida, why aren't you doing something similar? Why aren't you launching these kind of like mini parties in your parking lot? People can't all be together in the same house, but they can be in this kind of mechanism. So there's so many ways to consume sports that are not being taken advantage of, even though they exist in this really interesting place between the home to the stadium. And there is, think about how popular sports bars are. We recognize that there is so much more opportunity to distribute sports as content in existing mechanisms.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of interesting companies that are doing that kind of stuff. You mentioned Barbie and Oppenheimer. I think maybe we'll even get a mention of Taylor Swift later. So we'll hit all the social media buzzwords in one episode. This one, again, promotions at major stadiums, nothing new there. But the question I'll ask you is is that opportunity being maximized? Are we doing the best we can with that within the sports industry? So
I think the answer is not at all. And I come at this with two lenses. So the first is, let's do the obvious, but talk through the experience that takes place at a stadium. I'll talk through one of mine. I was at a Dolphins Commanders game this year. I went with my 8-year-old son. For him, or Maryland, DC. It was in DC. Okay. It was a rainy day. Thankfully, we won. It was in we being the Dolphins. The Dolphins. Because you're talking to a DC guy here, so I apologize. We all have our rough patches. But it was an experience where literally, as we're in the Uber on the way home, my 8-year-old looks up and says, "Best day of my life." Right? That is a powerful experience for us. And we think about how much we invest emotionally in sport and what is happening there. Now think about the advertising and the things that actually get pushed to you when you're at a stadium. There's beer ads. If I want a truck, if I whatever banking option is available in that region is always very well represented, maybe insurance companies. You know what I don't see? I don't see lots of brands aiming at the specific demographics and psychographic groups that are over-indexed to attend these events. So I don't see. I'll give you an example. One of my favorite brands. I love True Classic. True Classic is a menswear company that sells kind of, they're not cheap, but they're not super expensive T-shirts that are meant to fit guys with dad bods. Right? Really, really good, great product. Really feels really great. Love it. Isn't that an awesome place for them to push their product? Isn't everyone who's in that audience either connected to or the exact demographic they're looking to reach? And yet, why aren't they there? Because it's not part of their natural process. It's not part of the way they interact in a normal way. And there is a massive missed opportunity in stadiums and for brands to reach key audiences in a place where there's an emotional connection. We think about brand relationship and we talk about brands like Apple and Nike. And let me be clear, I love Apple and I love Nike. But we all know that our relationship with sport is so much more powerful. And the lack of capacity to take advantage of that in these environments, even in a small way, you don't need to be the official apparel sponsor of the team. is a missed opportunity. And I think it's something that when we talk to folks, there is a clear recognition that there's more that can be done and there's more value that can be created.
I promised Taylor Swift and we'll deliver. What does the Taylor Swift effect, the Taylor Swift tour in 2023 and now into 2024, what does that tell us about untapped opportunities in sports venues?
Yeah, so I mean, it's going to come off as shocking. Like, I didn't attend any Taylor Swift tours. I'm sure they are wonderful. One of the things that was really interesting was when we were looking at our data is we saw that, and again, these are the numbers of non-ticketed visitors. So we basically looked at the number of tickets sold in a venue and what the visit counts we saw at those stadiums were. And again, Nissan Stadium in Nashville was 33% more visitors than there were tickets to be sold. Now, okay, there's people who work at the stadium and all that, definitely. But we actually removed that from the perspective. We thought our data was wrong. We literally maybe there's a bug in the numbers. And then when we spoke to people on the ground, they were like, oh, no, people are tailgating this concert. When you think about that concept, I come hours early and I spend time there. And then the thing happens, and then I'm there afterwards. And this is every football game on every Sunday in that period of time. What an opportunity that takes place 3 to 4 hours prior to the game, hours after the game, the 3 hours of the game. How many people are in that space? And when we think about the missed opportunity of stadiums, it's not just the people who are attending. It's not just the people who are buying tickets. It's the people in the stadiums. It's the way the parking lots, It's the way we design those experiences for more food trucks and more experiential things in those areas so that we can take advantage of that demand that exists naturally, that's already coming. So the fascinating thing, we looked at this, we compared a stadium, and I forget the exact one, to a local major mall. The major mall over the course of an entire month when there was 2 football games, as a football-only stadium, had 500,000 visits. The major mall. The 2 games drove well over 200,000 visits on 2 days. 500,000 over 30-something days versus 200,000 over 2. That is a massive opportunity, and it is not being fully utilized. And it is not just the game or just the attendees. It's the entire experience that surrounds it.
Mm-hmm. I did go to a Taylor Swift concert in June last year with my daughters and my wife, and I can attest that the crowd outside was large, not as large as inside, but very large, and singing and dancing the entire time.
Did you make a friendship bracelet?
I was given friendship bracelets.
That's so nice.
Okay, so Super Bowl. Let's talk about this. What can we learn from the Super Bowl? Are there other wider lessons that can be learned from behavior patterns we've seen around the Super Bowl?
I think the Super Bowl is an interesting example in that it creates very distinct patterns. So, for example, one of our favorite things that happens consistently is grocery visits on the Saturday before the Super Bowl spike for the 2 teams that are playing in the Super Bowl. So if you look at Hy-Vee visits on the Saturday before Super Bowl Sunday, or visits in, whatever the top grocers are in that San Francisco area, you're going to see a spike in visits. That's really interesting. It makes tons of sense, right? When we think about the pre and post game journeys. So in Vegas, usually you'll see the number 1 ranked post game space is the local airport. People are they've gone to the game, and now it's time to go get back to work for Monday. In Vegas, the number 1 space was Caesars. So people are going from the stadium to Caesars more so than they were going to the airport, right? Tells us about that city and what's going on there. And what we're essentially trying to say is that there is so much in the fundamental journey that surrounds the visit. So there are some cities, we've done analysis of how likely an audience is to go out to eat post an NBA game in all of the major cities. We took a random month and we ranked the likelihood that the post-game visit was to somewhere to go out to eat. Now, there was elements that privileged the West Coast because the games happened a little bit earlier. And there were elements that privileged certain cities. And one of the things that was interesting was it was in close proximity to the stadium. So people were going out afterwards, but a lot of it was they didn't love the food options that were in the immediate vicinity or in the stadium itself. And it also speaks to this untapped demand. But this understanding on a location by location level is really critical to recognizing that oh, wow, the way we interact with sports actually presents so many opportunities for retailers, for advertisers, for the franchises themselves to maximize the value they can drive, but also to maximize the experience that they can create for the visitors themselves.
Let's talk about individuals. And I know we're going to talk about a few of them here. We already mentioned one individual in Taylor Swift, but I think it's really interesting with Deion Sanders in college sports and the effect that he has had, just an individual, on college sports and the growth of the Colorado program. Are there ways that we can lean into that as a sports industry to drive greater success more broadly?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing when we think about something like NIL, right, is the emphasis it has put in the college ranks on the individual. And it's something we've always known in professional sports. But I think the other element here is, who are the stars? And the stars aren't always who we expect them to be. And they're not always in the sports we expect them to be in. So Deion Sanders coming to Colorado, if you look at the actual visits to those games, they spike in a powerful way compared to where they were prior. But the amazing thing is they spike in the visiting stadiums too. And again, these are going to be teams that had a great season the year prior. We think about, let's take this to soccer. Think about like Lionel Messi joining. How big of a surge that drove in business. Now, obviously, these are unique moments, but there are smaller versions of this that are critical to understand, because if I'm trying to, whether it's sell partnerships for a stadium, I want these numbers to give a sense of how powerful the opportunity is. So much of think about the advertising out of home world that sponsorships impact. So much of the way that the brands that we're reaching out to or talking to operate in every other vertical is based on metrics. Okay, what are the TV eyeballs I'm getting via Nielsen? What are the online eyeballs I'm getting and I'm checking via SimilarWeb or ComScore? The physical eyeballs is a metric that we are not leveraging enough. And by the way, going even a level deeper, who are these? Who is this audience? Are they high earning? Are they lower earning? Are they more likely to be of a specific ethnicity? Are they more likely to be of a specific professional status? And what does that mean for the brands I'm trying to sell to? The interesting thing is, I've been on the receiving end of many calls from partnerships teams at professional stadiums. And it's always the same pitch. We are the biggest game in town in this city. Or, what a big deal it is to be associated with our brand. But I don't know what a big deal it is. I need to be shown. And that ability to put numbers behind these jumps, to say, here's what me having Lionel Messi means to you. It means 10,000 more people in seats. It means 6,000 more eyeballs on a specific day. And who are those 6,000? They're the highest earning people because these tickets are so expensive, and look at the areas they're coming from. And this is why you want to be a part of it. And that transition is what helps us go from, we know we're doing good things in stadiums, to we're really maximizing the opportunity.
Well, I want to give you a chance to leave the audience with this, Ethan. Sports in retail and physical spaces, sports industry, where are we heading? First question. Second question, how do we maximize the opportunity?
So I want to obviously, it's a very broad question, but I want to focus it in two spaces. So I want to talk about sports and retail, and I want to talk about retail and sports. So Let's start with sports and retail. Sports and retail needs to lean into the same trends that wider retail is seeing success with. It needs to focus more on flexible opportunities and ways to reach audiences. It needs to focus more on owned experiences. So a pop-up in the, again, let's go Dolphins, in the Aventura Mall, I want a Dolphins pop-up when the season kicks off, right? It needs more focus. It needs more focus on where and why. So what am I doing in what places, and what am I attempting to achieve from it? And how do I measure the value it brings back to the other elements of my business? But then there's also the idea of retail and sports. And for me, that's what's happening at the stadiums in these own spaces. We need to have a wider view of what belongs in these stadiums and who we should be speaking to. We need to focus more on experiences and enabling those experiences in different spaces before. So it's not just inside the stadium, it's the whole area around it that can be a value. And a much bigger emphasis on how do we target and how do we recognize that we're targeting those people with something that is far more significant than just, hey, you're at the game and you happen to be this audience, but that there's an inherent, baked in emotional relationship that comes that you get to tag on to by being within that environment. By the way, positive and negative emotions, because that's what we connect with. And so when you can drive the relationship with that connection, show in a metric-based way what that relationship can bring you, who is that audience, and why it's so significant to be a part of it, there is a massive opportunity to not just drive short-term gains, but to create those types of long-term sustainable successes that will allow these businesses to grow even further.
Thank you so much, Ethan. Thank you for being a part of SBJ Live. If there are questions from the audience, make sure you submit them. To the audience, I want to let you know that next week we've got 2 episodes of SBJ Live. You go to sportsbusinessjournal.com, scroll down on the right-hand side, and click on the SBJ Live icon. You can see all upcoming episodes. You can see all episodes on demand as well, as including this one very soon. Ethan, thank you so much for the time. Thank you to Placer AI for the support, and we will see everyone next week. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks all.